Hello everyone, here we are getting started on week 3. Just going to give you a quick update on where we're at, what we'll be covering this week. So this week I've got a few slides prepared in the overview to talk about random sampling, also address related topic on generalizability, and then some good questions that have been brought up in the past about bias and some concerns about survey research that realistically need to be brought up and addressed. And so a lot of this week kind of starts from that whole perspective of, starting to understand that maybe what you've thought were surveys in the past, or what your impression maybe was of survey research, really wasn't quite accurate, and that there's some pretty big flaws in things like convenience sampling, or some of the surveys that people typically do. And so we're going to go ahead and kick this week off by talking about a study that I've done comparing convenience samples, so those that you collect without using any kind of sampling strategy, with random sampling methods. And so both mail and phone surveys are included in that. And so good example, it's a paper I wrote a few years ago that I think will be useful to you. Then I've got some fantastic questions from week 3 from past semesters that those questions and the responses I provided to students, usually in the weekly summary at the end of the week, I think are a good starting point for our discussion this week, and hopefully it'll help answer some of your questions. And so I'm going to lean heavily on that for the overview this week. And with that said, let's go ahead and get started. We'll talk about convenience sampling versus random sampling for understanding water quality behaviors. All right, just another note on convenience surveys. This was a point that O'Leary really stressed in the reading this week, and I want to just go ahead and reiterate on this. I was involved in a study. I think it was about 4 years ago. It got published in 2010. That was really looking at some of the failures of convenience surveys that were being conducted by extension professionals and realistically soil and water conservation departments in Indiana, that were trying, the purpose of these surveys was that the soil and water conservation districts were trying to develop a water quality behavior education program, trying to figure out what the community knew about different behaviors related to water quality so that they could design educational materials to match that. And what they'd done was, we partnered up with one of these offices, and they provided us with access to their convenience samples. So they convenience sample number one was they'd set up a booth at the county, the annual county fair, and just whoever came up to the booth, they asked them if they wanted to fill out a survey. Some people did, some people didn't, and these were the results that they ended up with. Is that it's just whoever was convenient, whoever was willing to fill out the survey. So the other thing that they did was they also put out a web survey, which they didn't send out to people, but rather just put a link on their website. And so anybody who happened across their website, which usually was people who were more involved already with this soil and water conservation district, right, like their board members and their volunteers that were regularly checking for updates on events, they could sit down and fill out that survey as well. And so another convenience sample. And so they were using this information to drive their educational programming. Well, we noticed a number of other issues with this, but we basically wanted to test if the information that they were using was actually accurate or representative of the community to which they were trying to design the education program for. And so we followed this up with a mail survey, where again we purchased a sample of all residents, from all residents within the county, and we sent out a mail survey, and we got a 37% response rate on that. And for those, and then realistically, we were checking for non-response bias. We then did a phone survey follow-up later on that we followed up with people who had been sent the survey and didn't respond, to try and track what was going on there. And this was something that we did later on in the process. So, it's kind of a separate, we got into the analysis and realized that we had the potential for non-response bias, so we did a follow-up study. And so these results really should be analyzed as separate from the survey results, which is why they're not just all merged together. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide that talks about some of the results and the implications of these, but these were the 4 different survey types we were comparing. All right, so here's a quick view of the results from that study. And, again, these were asking people about their behavior related to water quality, or their awareness of different behaviors and how they affect water quality, in order to build a watershed education program. And so what we ended up finding first off is that we had very similar results in the convenience survey and in the random surveys, right? So whether it was on the web or just conducted at the fair, generally we didn't see differences between responses to these two different types of surveys. Flip over to the random surveys, the differences between mail and phone. Again, we didn't see differences, major differences between these two different survey methods. So, again, where we did find the difference is that there was absolutely a difference between those who responded to the convenience surveys and those who responded to the random surveys. And so, what we ended up seeing is that the convenience surveys were giving the water quality educators an incomplete look at what people knew about water quality behavior in the community. And basically what it was is people responding at on the web were the most knowledgeable. They already knew about these behaviors. They were already aware of them. The first question in here is, I live in a watershed, and this was rated between correct and incorrect. And you can see that 2/3 of the people responding to the survey knew that they lived in a watershed. And then you go over to the phone survey follow-up, and you see that this drops to only 1 in 4 people knew that they lived in a watershed, right? This, we see this on all 4 of the questions that we presented here, but there were a couple of others as well, where we're seeing these, distinct differences. And without going too much into the statistics behind this, an ANOVA is just a difference in means test between 2 different groups. And so that's how we compared these. And so again, what we're finding here is that the convenience surveys are not representative of the community. Therefore, any watershed education program that was built on them would be actually responding to, would likely end up being designed so that it was way over the head of the majority of people in the community, right? And so you're missing the people that you really want to be educating. And so again, I just wanted to bring this up as an example of what happens when we use a convenience survey. It's not representative of the general population. And realistically, especially with the way that the web and fair surveys were done, we don't even know who responded. So it's very, very difficult to even try and figure out what population that would be representative of. Again, because of the high levels of knowledge, what we're probably seeing on the web is that this is the board members and the volunteers filled out this survey. And that probably explains why we're seeing high levels of correct answers amongst that group, where we're not seeing those same answers being we're not seeing that level of knowledge with our random survey. So anyway, that's just an example I wanted to throw out there for you. All right, some random sampling questions for this week. So the first, just to jump right into it, the first question here is really talking about coverage error and what happens if we get down to that stage where we've collected our data and we realize that we've missed someone. So there's 2 important distinctions here. Can you go back and correct the problem? If you catch it early enough in your process, so ideally somewhere while you're still collecting data, you might be able to go back in, and the group of people that you missed in your sampling frame that were excluded, that should have been included in that sampling frame, you may be able to go back and pull a supplemental sample just out of that group of people, and then go ahead and send the surveys off to them and collect data as is. If you don't realize that you've gotten a problem until you're analyzing your data, so usually some months pass by, it's generally not a good idea to try and collect data a second time when you've had when a lot of time has passed in between. The basic reason for this is the situation may have changed. You may have had something occur, an event occur in the meantime where people's attitudes or awareness of a situation has changed. And so when you've had that gap of time, it's really like you're collecting a new data set. And so that's really difficult to go back and correct. Can you still use your data, or is it useless? Useless is what the question is. Your data's not useless unless it's a major error. generally what we do is we just go ahead and include this in the write-up of, these are the people that we included our sampling frame, and this is how we conducted our, pulled our sample from them, and we present that information. And we may actually go in and discuss some of the, in more detail what we may have missed by excluding a certain group of people. So that's always part of it. So, all right, jumping on to question 2. So question 2 is O'Leary discusses populations in the context of social science research. She refers to one population being studied. So the question here is can you only deal with one population, or can you have more than one? The answer to this question is right here. So when we do comparative studies, which are very, very common, there's often multiple populations being studied at the same time. So that's a quick answer to that question. All right, the last question here is a sample frame will ideally match your target population, but O'Leary suggests that this is a rare occurrence. What limitations and types of strategic decisions need to be taken into consideration in order to make a sample frame? Well, on the next slide, I'm going to go into an example and answer the second half of this question there. But on the first half of this, what O'Leary's really talking about is that, as much as we strive for perfection and ensuring that every single member of our population is included in the sampling frame so that they all have an equal chance of participation, in the real world, it just doesn't work that way. There's always, our access to lists of names is always incomplete, but we strive to ensure that we get as close as we possibly can. And very much like question 1, sometimes we realize we've made a mistake somewhere down the road and either have an opportunity to correct it, or at least we ensure that we present that with our data. So, all right, I'll go ahead and move on to the example here. All right, Megan asked for some real-world advice about how we go about generating a sampling frame. So Megan posted this up on the discussion boards, and I thought this was a good example to bring up. And so one of the things she's interested in doing is she's interested in conducting a survey. And initially her thought is about surveying Stevens Point residents, so the general public, about their attitudes towards the creation of a friends group at Schmeekley Reserve. So how would you go about finding those names? Generating a list of names. Well, the first step in this process is making sure that you've identified your population correctly. And so the question I responded with here was, I asked Megan if she was interested in the attitudes of the general public in Stevens Point, or is this really more about understanding the attitudes of individuals who are already involved with Schmeekley, or realistically the stakeholders that have an interest in Schmeekley Reserve, and so those people most likely to participate in this. And so which one of those populations you're interested in studying really affects how you construct the sampling frame. And so I've presented a couple of different options here. The first one is if you're looking for these involved individuals, so really our stakeholders, doing a survey of stakeholders involved. This involvement could mean simply individuals who've been to one or more of the many community events that are hosted at Schmeekley. It could be visitors to the center. It could also be faculty members and staff that have here on campus. And I would make the claim that there's probably a difference in the connection that CNR faculty have to Schmeekley versus other people here on campus, but both are clearly distinct user groups or distinct stakeholders in this process. And so when you go about constructing your sampling frame here, it's really important that you work through this with your advisor and figure out who all it is that you're interested in learning from, right? Who has the answer, which people or individuals can you collect data from, because to give you the answer to your research question. That's what I'm trying to spit out. So and so that becomes one of those, how would you get access to these people? And so I suggested on the suggested on the discussion board that, just a very simple way of doing this would be, Schmeekley has a guest book that is signed. And so that might be one way of getting access to the stakeholder group, or just the casual visitors, members of the public who come to Schmeekley, either one time or on a frequent basis. But you could use that as a data source, right? You wouldn't want to just pull straight from that list of people, because then you're getting into that convenient sampling. And so just whatever would be convenient to you as a researcher to grab a list of names and survey those people. It really needs to be better planned out than that. So avoid that temptation for just grabbing that convenient sample. And so what ultimately that this surveying these involved individuals would be is this is going to evolve into a stratified sample of some kind, where you're trying to get a representation of the different groups of stakeholders. And visitors or the general public that visits Schmeekly is absolutely a group you'd want to know about, and they're a much larger group than, say, faculty and staff here on campus. And so you may oversample faculty and staff because you want to know what the different groups of stakeholders. You basically are trying to understand what all of the stakeholders understand. You've got these different groups, and so you want to make sure those different groups have their opinions heard, right? The other option for how you'd construct a sampling frame here is really going back to Megan's original question: how do we get a list of names of the general public in order to conduct a survey? So there's a lot of different ways on how you can go about doing this. And so the old approach was you go grab the phone book. For Stevens Point, it's got a list of everybody in town, every household in town. You'd go through and you pick out the 9th name on every single page, or some predetermined way of grabbing names out of the phone book. We know that there are issues with that now. Phone surveying has gotten much more difficult, if not worthless, realistically, with the evolution of the cell phone and people dumping their landlines. I fall into that category. The studies have suggested that realistically it's younger people are completely being left out of phone surveys that still rely on landlines. So that is a huge issue. So what other ways could we go about getting a list of names of households here in Stevens Point? Well, one of the ways that you could do this is you could talk to a public utility, so like the water company, and ask for a list of their clients, right? So who's all receiving water bills from the City of Stevens Point Water Department? As a public utility, they may not provide you this information at first, but we can often file a Freedom of Information request with them that will allow you access to a complete list of their clients. So that's one way of doing it. The more common approach is that because of some of the difficulties, specifically with the phone book issue, of identifying sampling frames, there are a number of businesses that have evolved that this is what they do. They generate lists of names for surveying, and so if anybody gets to a point where they're looking to a general population, I can send you a link. I know there are a number of different corporations out there that do this work, and so I'm not going to endorse one over the other here. But basically what it is you pay them to go get you a clean sample of names from a community that you've specified, right? And so they generally start with the phone book, but they also bring in census data. They bring in other information that they can they bring in a number of different data sources all together at one point, or for that community, and they generate a list of names that you can use. So that's another option you've got on that if you've got the budget available to buy those names. All right, another good question about generalizability and really specifically getting back to sample size. This question, I'm going to go ahead and allow you just to go ahead and read through this question and response that were posted up on the discussion boards. Really what this comes down to is how do we balance sample size? So the need in quantitative research that the bigger sample is always better, which there's reasons for that, specifically related to your ability to perform more powerful statistical tests. But without getting too far into this, I just wanted to make sure that this was, this response was available to everybody in the class. Because again, I think what you're going to find is that, your sample size versus what you can actually accomplish is an important discussion that you need to have with your advisor anytime you're undertaking this type of work. And so, this is going to be budget related. It's also going to be your time, not only to conduct the survey, so develop the survey, send the survey out, enter all of the data once it's come back in, and analyze that data. You've got to realize that as the survey gets larger and larger, all of those things take more time. And so, again, the best advice I've got is that to continue this discussion with your advisor as you're trying to develop this. But, go ahead and read through this response here. I just wanted to make sure this was out there for everybody. All right, so this next question is really just a dialogue that Jason and I have been having online, specifically looking at validity and reliability. But really from the context of the discussion, it's all about how do we control potential bias or people messing with our survey results, or how can we ensure that we're actually getting an accurate response from individuals. And what are some of the techniques and strategies that are out there? And I just wanted to put up this. I just wanted to put up a response that I posted online just so that everybody was familiar with it. And so this really comes back to Jason's statement that he's not sure about some components of the discussion we were having, but he says just because someone reliably gives you the same answer multiple times doesn't mean there is any truth to the answer they are giving you. Some people will give answers that they really don't know the answer for in order to make them feel more important, etc. And so certainly these are concerns that we're constantly vigilant in quantitative research methods, is that we need to make sure that we're writing questions that people can respond to, right? We don't want to write over the top of somebody's heads. We need to provide people with outs if they don't know the answer, right? And so sometimes we have a don't know option that's there. But again, then even there we're losing possible data, and so we wanted to write the questions so that that people can answer them, right? We want to make sure that we're putting the survey into the hands of people who can respond to this. But again, here are some of here's some of my responses. Some just things to think about when we're thinking about survey research in terms of, there is a concern, and we've all seen short, crummy little surveys, usually product product marketers will call and ask you, what you think about this or that, and they're willing to give you a free T-shirt for it, right? And you don't respond truthfully to that. How does that translate over into our world as far as doing quantitative research? And so here, some of my responses here is that basically a lot of those concerns, are things that have been looked at repeatedly. There are a number of researchers out there that specifically spend their time trying to understand the best way to develop surveys to control for bias. But in general, what we find is that a standard research survey is just a different instrument, right? It's longer. It's specifically designed so that when we're concerned about that type of bias, we include multiple phrasings of similar questions. So within that longer format, it's very difficult for people to continue to lie or lie consistently throughout it. And then the other part that's, there are some other considerations that are down here. And so I'll just let you go ahead and read through this, but I thought it was important to pull out and put out here for everybody to take a look at. All right.